Bobo Brazil was a wrestling legend, one of the first black superstars in the sport. But behind the fame, there's a story most people don't know, a story of struggle, controversy, and resilience, and a tragic death that shook the world. Let's get into it. Houston Harris, though you might know him by his ring name, Bobo Brazil was a true trailblazer, breaking down racial barriers in professional wrestling and paving the way for so many others in the sport. Bobo Brazil wasn't just any wrestler. He's considered one of the very first black stars in wrestling, making a name for himself at a time when segregation and racial discrimination were big obstacles. But he didn't let any of that hold him back. He was an icon, but they too have struggles and controversies, right? Let's get into them. Now, about that championship controversy, it was 1962 and Bobo was facing off against Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, a huge star at the time. During the match, Bobo accidentally caught Rogers with a low blow, a hit below the belt. Now, accidents happen in wrestling, but this one was a bit different. Bobo, being the sportsman he was, refused to accept the championship victory because of it. He felt it wasn't an honorable way to win. They had a rematch a few weeks later, and Rogers regained the title. This whole incident has been debated for years. Some wrestling historians believe it was a planned storyline. The idea was to test the waters, to see how audiences would react to a black champion. Remember, this was a time when racial prejudice was still very much alive. Others believe it was a genuine act of sportsmanship on Bobo's part. Either way, it shines a light on the challenges he faced and the barriers he was breaking down. But you know, it's easy to look back at wrestling legends like Bobo Brazil and just see the highlight reel, the packed arenas, the roaring crowds. No one even cares to see the racially discriminating side of it, unfortunately. Bobo was a pioneer, no doubt about it. But being a pioneer often means having to blaze a trail through some pretty rough territory. And for Bobo, that meant walking into a world where racism was still deeply entrenched. First up, let's talk about segregated audiences. In the early years of Bobo's career, especially in the southern U.S., black and white fans weren't allowed to sit together. Black fans often had to sit in separate, less desirable sections, sometimes with obstructed views. Then there were the travel restrictions. On the road, Bobo couldn't stay at just any hotel or eat at just any restaurant due to racial discrimination. While traveling was tough for all wrestlers, for Bobo, it was even harder because of these limitations. All of this was truly sad. Beyond the ring, Bobo had his personal struggles. He battled with drug and alcohol addiction for much of his life. It's a sad reality that many people, even successful ones, face these demons. These addictions unfortunately led to missed bookings, strained relationships, and financial difficulties. He'd sometimes disappear for periods, making promoters and fans worry. Talking about his financial troubles in detail, Bobo Brazil's wrestling journey kicked off in the early 1950s. By the 1960s, he was one of the biggest stars in wrestling, a top draw everywhere he went, including in the WWF, what we know today as WWE. At his peak, Bobo was reportedly earning thousands of dollars each week, which was huge back then. He headlined shows all across the country, going up against legends like Killer Kowalski and Freddie Blassie. This success allowed him to buy a house and provide well for his family, but things started to change in the 1970s and 80s. Wrestling's territory system, the regional promotions where wrestlers would move between different areas, began to fade as national promotions like WWF and WCW took over. This shift hit many wrestlers hard, and Bobo was no exception. The new wrestling landscape affected his bookings and his income. On top of that, Bobo faced personal struggles. There were missed chances that could have boosted his career even further. One big example, WrestleMania 3 in 1987. Bobo was reportedly offered a spot at this historic event, but due to health reasons, he couldn't participate. It would have been a huge payday and a chance to cement his legacy on wrestling's biggest stage. Bobo continued to wrestle into the 1990s, but as time went on, his health declined, and so did his finances. He eventually had to rely on the generosity of friends and fans to get by. Sadly, his life came to an end on January 20th, 1998, at the age of 73. In his prime, Bobo was a household name in wrestling. He broke down barriers as one of the first African-American wrestlers to headline major events and pave the way for future generations. But after decades in the ring, the wear and tear took a toll on his health. By the 1990s, Bobo was dealing with serious medical issues and struggled financially. In the years leading up to his death, Bobo's health had declined significantly. Friends and fans stepped in to help cover his medical bills, showing just how much he was loved and respected in the wrestling community. Despite his struggles, Bobo remained positive and grateful, often reflecting on the fans who supported him throughout his career. On January 20th, 1998, Bobo Brazil passed away due to complications from multiple health issues. The wrestling world mourned his loss, paying tribute to his legacy and remembering the mark he left on the industry. For many fans and wrestlers alike, Bobo wasn't just a superstar, he was a pioneer who broke down racial barriers and brought a new level of athleticism to the ring. Although he is gone, we cannot forget to relive his career. Houston Harris, later known as Bobo Brazil, was born on July 10, 1924, in Little Rock, Arkansas. He didn't have an easy start. His dad passed away when he was just 7 years old, which led him to take on various odd jobs to help make ends meet. He worked on a local fruit farm, earning a humble 50 cents per container he packed. These experiences shaped his character, hardworking, resilient, and determined. Eventually, his family moved to East St. Louis, Illinois, and later to Benton Harbor, Michigan. It was here that he'd get his first taste of fame, but not as a wrestler just yet. Houston was a talented baseball player in the Negro Leagues, playing for a team called the House of David. But one day at a steel mill, he was spotted by someone who saw a wrestler in him, and that's where his journey began. Houston's introduction to wrestling came when he met Joe Savoldi, a professional wrestler who took him under his wing. Joe trained him, teaching him not only the techniques, but also the values to uphold in the ring. Joe believed in wrestling with honor, never taking shortcuts, and always respecting the fans. Originally, Joe gave him the wrestling name Bobo Brazil, the South American Giant. But in an unexpected twist, a promoter accidentally misprinted his name as Bobo instead of Boo Boo in an ad. And that's the name that stuck, Bobo Brazil, a name that would soon become iconic in the wrestling world. Now let's take a moment to understand the wrestling world Bobo entered. It was the late 1940s, a time when segregation was everywhere, including in wrestling. Black wrestlers were often limited to facing only other black wrestlers. But Bobo was different. His popularity soared. People loved watching him, and his appeal went beyond race. He was so popular, in fact, that promoters began to look past their racial prejudices, realizing they could make more money if he fought white wrestlers too. Bobo's success started to break down barriers in the South and beyond. In fact, his very first recorded match on March 29th, 1948, was against a white wrestler named Armand Myers. Bobo's honest, crowd-pleasing style, coupled with his powerful moves and iconic sequined cape, stitched by his wife, by the way, won him fans of all backgrounds. While Bobo's popularity grew, so did the challenges he faced. Fans loved him, but that didn't protect him from racial discrimination. African-American fans were often forced to sit in segregated sections with poor views of the ring. Bobo himself was denied entry to many restaurants and hotels due to his skin color. Still, he remained a hero for people of all backgrounds, especially African-American fans who saw him as a powerful figure breaking down boundaries. Bobo Brazil was involved in some historic matches, including one on October 9, 1970 in Atlanta, where he and his partner El Mongol faced Mr. Ito and the Great Oda. This was the first racially mixed tag team match in Atlanta's history. Bobo also became a mentor to other wrestlers, including Coleman Rocky Johnson, father of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and even inspired boxer Joe Frazier. And he wasn't alone in his journey. His manager, James Dudley, who was the first African-American to manage a major arena in the United States, would enter the ring waving a towel as Bobo followed. It was a powerful image that thrilled fans and symbolized how far they'd come together. After a remarkable career that spanned nearly 5 decades, Bobo Brazil retired in 1993. His last official match was in Chicago against Kelly Kiniski, son of another of his rivals, Gene Kiniski. Bobo's influence in wrestling was undeniable, and in 1994 he was inducted into the WWF Hall of Fame by his longtime rival Ernie Ladd. The following year, Bobo returned the honor by inducting Ernie into the Hall of Fame. Outside the ring, Bobo was a family man with a wife and 6 children. He ran a restaurant called Bobo's Grill for over 20 years. His legacy continued through his son, Carl, who wrestled under the name Bobo Brazil Jr. Sadly, Bobo passed away on January 20th, 1998, after a series of strokes. Bobo Brazil wasn't just a wrestling legend. He was a trailblazer who shattered barriers, inspired countless fans, and paved the way for African-American wrestlers. His journey from humble beginnings to wrestling stardom is one of resilience, talent, and honor. To this day, Bobo Brazil's legacy lives on, both in the wrestling ring and in the hearts of fans around the world. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed learning about Bobo Brazil, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video for more wrestling stories. See you in the next one. Kerry was part of the legendary Von Erich family, a name that dominated professional wrestling during its golden years. But behind the fame, Kerry faced unimaginable pain, tragedy, and struggles that shaped his life in ways no one could understand. This is the story of a man who fought to live up to his family's legacy. Let's get into it. To understand Kerry's story, you have to know a bit about the Von Erich family. Led by their father Fritz, the Von Erichs were a dynasty in the world of wrestling. Fritz was a larger-than-life promoter and wrestler who built a wrestling empire in Texas, especially through his promotion, world-class championship wrestling. Kerry was one of Fritz's 6 sons, and boy, was he a standout. Known as the modern-day warrior, Kerry had movie star looks, incredible charisma, and athleticism that made him a natural in the ring. By the early 1980s, he was a huge star, competing against legends like Ric Flair and becoming a household name in wrestling. Fans loved him, and he was one of WCCW's biggest draws. But the Von Erich family wasn't just famous for their wrestling. They were also infamous for the tragedies that seemed to follow them. On June 4, 1986, Kerry's life took a devastating turn. While riding his motorcycle, he was involved in a serious accident that nearly took his life. He suffered a dislocated hip and massive damage to his right leg. Doctors worked hard to save it, but after several surgeries, they realized his foot couldn't be saved. Amputation was the only option. Now here's where the story takes a twist. According to Kerry's brother Kevin, Kerry might have worsened his situation. While recovering in the hospital after surgery, Kerry tried to walk on his injured foot during the night. Apparently, he was just hungry and wanted to grab something to eat, but he re-injured the foot. This forced doctors to amputate it entirely. But wrestling manager Bill Moody, whom fans will forever remember as Paul Bearer, shared a different perspective on what really led to Kerry's amputation. According to him, it wasn't just the motorcycle accident that caused the damage. Moody claimed the real turning point came months later, in February 1987, during a wrestling match in Fort Worth, Texas. At the time, Kerry's injured foot hadn't fully healed, but he was adamant about getting back in the ring. To help him push through the pain, doctors administered a heavy dose of painkillers before the match. Sadly, this decision had dire consequences. The intense physical strain during the match, coupled with the numbing effect of the painkillers, made the injury far worse. By the time the match ended, the damage to Kerry's foot was beyond repair, forcing doctors to amputate. Whatever the exact timeline, it was clear this was a life-altering moment for Kerry. Losing his foot was devastating, but Kerry was determined not to let it define him. Despite losing his foot, he didn't stop wrestling. Kerry got a prosthetic leg and went right back to performing. And here's the wild part. He kept the amputation a secret from almost everyone. Fans didn't know. Most wrestlers didn't know. He even went to the extreme of showering with his wrestling boots on so no one would see. But as with any secret, some people knew. Wrestling legend Roddy Piper later revealed that Kerry trusted him enough to take off his prosthetic leg in private. Piper said that Kerry sat with him in a hotel room, prosthetic off, just talking about life. It was a rare moment of vulnerability in a career built on presenting strength. Kerry's determination to keep wrestling after the accident was inspiring, but it came with a cost. The pain from his injuries never fully went away, and the emotional toll of losing his foot weighed on him heavily. To cope, Kerry turned to painkillers. What started as a way to manage his physical pain quickly spiraled into addiction. Over time, Kerry's drug problems grew worse. He faced legal trouble, including 2 arrests for drug-related charges. The first resulted in probation, but the second was much more serious. It violated his probation, and he was facing the possibility of significant jail time. Kerry's world was crumbling, and it seemed like he couldn't find a way out. On February 18, 1993, just 15 days after his 33rd birthday, Kerry made a devastating decision. He went to his family's ranch in Denton County, Texas. Before leaving, he hugged his father, Fritz, and told him, "Dad, I love you." Then Kerry walked into the woods and surrendered his life. Kerry's death shocked the wrestling world, but for those closest to him, it wasn't entirely unexpected. According to Bret Hart, Kerry had been struggling with suicidal thoughts for years. During a road trip in 1990, Kerry confided in Bret, saying he felt like his brothers who had passed, David, Mike, and Chris, were calling him. Bret tried to talk him out of it, urging him to think about his daughters. But Kerry's pain ran deep. By 1992, his marriage had fallen apart, and he felt more lost than ever. Despite all the tragedy, Kerry and the Von Erich family's contributions to wrestling are unforgettable. In 2009, the entire Von Erich family was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. The ceremony took place at the Toyota Center in Houston, Texas, and it was a touching tribute to one of wrestling's most famous families. Kerry's daughters, Holly and Lacey, attended the event with their mother, Kathy. WWE created 2 Hall of Fame rings with Kerry's name engraved on them, and his brother Kevin gave those rings to his daughters. It was a bittersweet moment, celebrating the family's incredible legacy while acknowledging the pain they endured. As much as I would like to leave it on this heavy note, I also want you to enjoy his legacy. He was a true wrestler and he deserves your few minutes. Let's start from the start, shall we? Kerry Jean Adkisson, better known as Kerry Von Erich, was born on February 3, 1960. He was the son of wrestling legend and promoter Fritz Von Erich, and like his brothers David, Kevin, Mike, and Chris, Kerry was destined for the wrestling ring. But before stepping between the ropes, Kerry was a standout athlete in another area, track and field. In high school, Kerry was a discus-throwing phenom, even setting records. He was so good that he trained to compete in the 1980 Summer Olympics. Unfortunately, the U.S. boycott of the Games meant he never got the chance to show the world what he could do. But hey, Kerry didn't let that stop him. He took that athleticism straight into the wrestling world. And fun fact, his discus skills inspired one of his signature moves in the ring, the spinning discus punch. Kerry made his wrestling debut on May 7, 1978, in his dad's promotion, Big Time Wrestling. Right away, fans could tell Kerry had something special. He was built like a superhero, moved like an athlete, and had this magnetic charm that made people cheer for him. He quickly became one of the promotion's rising stars. In those early days, Kerry teamed up with various wrestlers and won several tag team championships. But he wasn't just a tag team guy. He was destined for bigger things. In 1980, Kerry won his first major singles title, defeating Gino Hernandez for the NWA American Heavyweight Championship. That was a huge moment for him, even though he lost the belt shortly after to Ken Patera. But you know Kerry, he came back swinging, winning it again from the masked superstar not long after. In 1982, he started feuding with the NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Ric Flair. Now, if you know wrestling, you know Flair was the guy at the time. He was the measuring stick. So for Kerry to go toe-to-toe with Flair was a big deal. On August 15, 1982, Kerry got his first shot at Flair's title in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Even though Flair walked away with the win, Kerry showed the world he belonged in the main event. But it wasn't just Flair who became Kerry's rival. Around this time, another feud was heating up, and it would define Kerry's career, the Von Erichs versus the Fabulous Freebirds. The pinnacle of Kerry's early career came on May 6, 1984, at the David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions. The event was held in honor of Kerry's brother David, who had tragically passed away a few months earlier. Over 45,000 fans packed into Texas Stadium to watch Kerry take on Ric Flair for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. And guess what? Kerry did it. He beat Flair to become the NWA World Champion. It was an emotional victory, not just for Kerry, but for the entire Von Erich family. That moment wasn't just about a wrestling title. It was about honoring his brother's memory and giving fans something to celebrate. Kerry Von Erich didn't just stick to Texas when building his wrestling career. From 1979 to the mid-1980s, he traveled the world, competing in some of the biggest wrestling promotions of the era. He worked for All Japan Pro Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, Mid-South Wrestling, Championship Wrestling from Florida, and Central States Wrestling, to name a few. Wherever he went, Kerry's charisma and athleticism made him a standout. In Florida, he teamed up with his brother David, but not in the way you might think. They played the bad guys. David was the loudmouth, arrogant, spoiled rich kid, while Kerry brought his own flavor as a cocky, self-absorbed muscle man. Fans loved to hate them, and it added a whole new dimension to Kerry's early career. Kerry's success wasn't just about tag teams or heel antics, though. He made his mark in singles competition as well, particularly during his time with the St. Louis Wrestling Club, where he held the NWA Missouri Heavyweight Championship in 1983. This title was a big deal, often seen as a stepping stone to the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. And speaking of big moments, Kerry made his Madison Square Garden debut in 1980, defeating Jose Estrada. Wrestling at the Garden is a milestone for any wrestler, and Kerry's victory there only added to his growing reputation. Over the years, he continued to shine, including a memorable appearance for the American Wrestling Association at Super Clash in 1985, where he defeated Jimmy Garvin to retain the NWA Texas Heavyweight Championship. By 1989, Kerry was wrestling under the United States Wrestling Association banner, continuing his dominance at the Dallas Sportatorium, a venue synonymous with the Von Erich name. Under the USWA, he teamed up with Jeff Jarrett, and together they captured the tag team titles. Kerry also reclaimed the Texas Heavyweight Championship twice, proving he was still a force to be reckoned with. One of his most memorable feuds during this time was against Matt Bourne, who turned heel in a dramatic ringside interview. The feud escalated to the point where the two brawled outside the arena in a raging thunderstorm, a moment fans in Dallas still talk about. Kerry also faced off against his former manager, Percy Pringle, who had turned heel and aligned himself with other villains. The drama was intense, but just as things were heating up, Kerry made a surprising decision to leave USWA and join Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. In 1990, Kerry took his talents to the WWF, where he was rebranded as the Texas Tornado. His debut was electrifying. On Saturday night's main event, he faced Buddy Rose, who, funnily enough, was also his very first opponent in his wrestling career, and picked up a decisive win. From the start, it was clear Kerry was going to be a major player. At SummerSlam that year, he got his big moment, stepping in for an injured Brutus Beefcake to challenge Mr. Perfect for the Intercontinental Championship. In a match that thrilled fans, Kerry defeated Perfect to win the title. It was a career-defining moment and showed that he could hang with the very best in the business. As Intercontinental Champion, Kerry defended his title against all challengers, including a televised defense against Haku. However, after a 3-month reign, he lost the belt back to Mr. Perfect in a rematch. The loss wasn't clean. Ted DiBiase's interference cost Kerry the match in the championship. Not one to back down, Kerry quickly shifted his focus to getting revenge on DiBiase, and the two clashed in a series of matches. Even without the belt, Kerry remained a fan favorite. At Survivor Series in 1990, he joined forces with the Ultimate Warrior and the Legion of Doom in a classic elimination match. Though he was eliminated by his old rival Mr. Perfect, his team ultimately came out victorious. Kerry started 1991 strong, competing in the Royal Rumble match, where he entered 5th and lasted nearly 30 minutes before being eliminated by The Undertaker. He kept up his momentum, making his one and only WrestleMania appearance at WrestleMania 7, where he defeated Dino Bravo with his signature Tornado Punch. Throughout the first half of the year, Kerry was heavily featured and rarely lost a match. But by the summer, his push began to slow. He suffered his first major loss in August 1991 to the Warlord, and though he continued to compete in high-profile matches, it was clear he was no longer in the title picture. At SummerSlam, he teamed up with Ricky Steamboat and the British Bulldog in a 6-man tag match, earning a win against Power and Glory and the Warlord. By late 1991, Kerry's role in the WWF was beginning to diminish. He renewed his rivalry with Ric Flair when Flair joined the WWF, but the results weren't in Kerry's favor. On the UK tour in October, Flair defeated him multiple times. Shortly after, Kerry suffered a decisive loss to The Undertaker on the Wrestling Challenge. Though he competed at Survivor Series that year in the Royal Rumble in 1992, his matches were less prominent. By early 1992, he was relegated to opening matches and facing lower-level opponents like Barry Horowitz and Kato. While he won those matches, he wasn't moving back up the card. His final televised match in the WWF came in July 1992, where he lost to Shawn Michaels. Originally scheduled to face Papa Shango at SummerSlam in London, Kerry was replaced on the card and officially left the company in August. After leaving the WWF, Kerry returned to Texas, where he briefly held the USWF Texas Heavyweight Championship before losing it to Dynamite Dixon. In 1993, he made an appearance for Eastern Championship Wrestling at their Battle of the Belts event, facing Sal Bellomo to a double disqualification. Kerry also wrestled for the Global Wrestling Federation, teaming up with former rival Chris Adams. His final match took place on February 12, 1993, at the Sportatorium in Dallas. Teaming with Adams, Kerry faced Johnny Mantell and Black Bart, but the match ended in a disqualification. Though his career ended far too soon, Kerry Von Erich's legacy as a wrestling superstar lives on. From his early days competing around the world to his iconic WWF run as the Texas Tornado, Kerry had a career filled with incredible highs and unforgettable moments. As a member of the legendary Von Erich family, he carried on the tradition of greatness while making a name for himself. Kerry Von Erich's wrestling career was a journey filled with unforgettable moments, from his early days dominating regional promotions to his memorable run as the Texas Tornado in the WWF. He was more than just a member of the legendary Von Erich family. He was a star in his own right, beloved by fans for his athleticism, charisma, and larger-than-life presence in the ring. His time in promotions like Mid-South Wrestling, Florida Championship Wrestling, and St. Louis Wrestling Club showcased his versatility and potential, while his travels to Japan proved his appeal was global. Though his life and career ended, Kerry Von Erich's legacy continues to inspire fans and wrestlers alike. He embodied the spirit of resilience and passion, leaving behind a lasting impression in the world of professional wrestling. For all his highs and lows, Kerry will always be remembered as a true icon, a Texas Tornado who took the wrestling world by storm. Nikita Koloff. This guy was a total beast in the ring, known for his raw power and that icy Russian stare. But like many wrestlers, his career wasn't without a bit of controversy. So let's break it down, shall we? Now, before we get into the controversies, let's set the stage. Nikita Koloff burst onto the scene in the early 80s, managed by the legendary Russian bear Ivan Koloff. He played the Russian villain perfectly, and man, could he wrestle. He tore it up in the NWA, racking up titles like the World Six-Man Tag Team Championship, the World Tag Team Championship, and even the U.S. title. Nikita's intensity was off the charts. He was like a machine, just relentless aggression and power. But his career wasn't a plain page. Remember the Cold War era. Back then, America and the Soviet Union didn't like each other very much. So when Nikita showed up pretending to be a scary Russian guy, it got people really riled up. Some people thought it was a bad idea to have a Russian bad guy at a time when everyone was worried about war. But wrestling is like that. It takes what's happening in the world and turns it into a show. Nikita was really good at his job. He acted like a mean Russian so well that everyone believed him. But here's the funny part. He wasn't Russian at all. He was from Minnesota, and he was so good at it that fans genuinely believed he was from behind the Iron Curtain. Can you believe it? Fans were really mad when they found out he was just pretending. But hey, let's not forget about the exciting stuff. Nikita had some amazing matches with another wrestler named Magnum TA. They were both at the top of their game, like the best basketball players in the whole school. Their matches were super exciting, with lots of action and close calls. Everyone remembers those fights, and they made Nikita a famous wrestler. Unfortunately, like many wrestlers back then, Nikita used things called steroids to get stronger. It was a different time, and lots of people made bad choices. Looking back, it wasn't a good thing, and Nikita has said he feels sorry about it. As much as he wanted everyone to be his fan, he couldn't please everyone. Nikita did something that made some fans upset. He left his wrestling company, JCP, and joined a different one called AWA. It was like switching from one sports team to their biggest rival. JCP was having some problems, and some people thought Nikita shouldn't have left them when they were down. It definitely left a mark on his legacy. And speaking of controversial moves, his return to WCW in the early 90s wasn't exactly a triumphant one. He was past his prime, and WCW didn't seem to know what to do with him. It was a bit of a sad ending for a guy who had been such a dominant force in the 80s. If you're wondering where he is now, then these days Nikita Koloff is deeply involved in Christian ministry. He became a born-again Christian in 1993 and has dedicated his life to sharing his faith. He travels around the country, speaking at churches, schools, and prisons. He even runs his own ministry called Koloff for Christ Ministries. He's also written a few books, including his autobiography, Wrestling with Success. In it, he talks about his wrestling career, his faith, and how he found a new purpose in life. So while he may not be body-slamming opponents anymore, he's still making an impact in a different way. But hey, let's not dwell on the negatives. He may have had his controversies, but he also had incredible matches, memorable feuds, and a lasting impact on the wrestling world. His legacy was great, and if you're a real fan, keep watching. Let's relive his career. Nikita Koloff, born Simpson, yep, his real last name, came into the world on March 9, 1959, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He was one of 4 kids born to Paige and Olive Simpson. Life wasn't easy, though. When Nikita was just 2 years old, his dad left the family, and his mom stepped up to raise him and his siblings all on her own. When he was 10, the family moved to Robbinsdale, a Minneapolis suburb. Even back then, Nikita was all about physical fitness. By junior high, he was already hitting the weights, setting the stage for the powerhouse we'd come to know later in the wrestling ring. At Robbinsdale High School, Nikita balanced school with his passion for sports. He played football as a defensive lineman and even snagged an all-conference wide receiver title. But here's a cool twist. Robbinsdale High was basically a breeding ground for future wrestling stars. Nikita roamed the same halls as Barry Darsow, Curt Hennig, Rick Rude, and Tom Zenk, names that would light up the wrestling world in years to come. After graduating in 1977, Nikita headed to Golden Valley Lutheran College to play football. There, he crossed paths with Joe Laurinaitis, who'd later become famous as Road Warrior Animal. Football was Nikita's first love, but injuries kept getting in the way. He pushed through and transferred to Minnesota State University Moorhead, but bad luck struck again. Another injury sidelined his dreams. By 1984, Nikita was gearing up for a tryout with the USFL, hoping to reignite his football career. But fate had other plans. His old college buddy, Road Warrior Animal, gave him a call with an interesting pitch. Why not try professional wrestling? Nikita was intrigued, and Animal didn't sugarcoat the advice. Shave your head and come ready to rumble. Nikita decided to go for it. And that's when Jim Crockett Jr., a major wrestling promoter, stepped in to create the persona we all know, Nikita Koloff, the Russian Nightmare. With his new identity, Nikita joined forces with Uncle Ivan Koloff and Don Colonel to form a Soviet villain team in the wrestling world. His transformation was quick and dramatic. With only a little training from Eddie Sharkey, Nikita made his wrestling debut on June 5, 1984. And get this, he won his first match in just 13 seconds, but the pressure was on. Jim Crockett Jr. told Nikita that if he stumbled on the ropes during his debut, he'd be fired right then and there. To sharpen his skills, Nikita Koloff hit the road alongside Ivan Koloff and Don Colonel. Early on, he was kept in the background. His matches were short, and during TV interviews, he stood silently with his arms crossed, the ultimate enforcer. But as Nikita improved in the ring and on the mic, he started to step into a bigger role. Determined to perfect his Russian villain character, Nikita even learned to speak Russian and stayed in character outside the ring. When Colonel's storyline wrapped up, Ivan introduced Nikita's new partner, Crusher Khrushchev, played by Barry Darsow, one of Nikita's old high school buddies. Together, they were unstoppable, winning the NWA World Six-Man Tag Team Championship in December 1984. And just a few months later, in March, Nikita and Ivan took the NWA World Tag Team titles, defeating wrestling legends Dusty Rhodes and Manny Fernandez. In 1985, the Koloffs locked horns with the Road Warriors in a rivalry fans couldn't get enough of. Their brutal matches, often fought in steel cages or under Russian chain match rules, became Nikita's signature. One of these matches was even named Match of the Year runner-up by Pro Wrestling Illustrated. That same year, Nikita's momentum reached new heights. At the Great American Bash, he challenged NWA World Champion Ric Flair. He didn't win, but the match cemented his place as one of wrestling's top stars. Nikita himself called it his favorite match of all time. Later in 1985, Nikita and Ivan reclaimed the NWA World Tag Team titles from the Rock and Roll Express, only to lose them in an epic steel cage showdown at Starrcade 1985. And then came 1986, a year that made wrestling history. Nikita started an unforgettable feud with Magnum TA. It all began when Nikita insulted Magnum's mother during a contract signing. Things escalated quickly, leading to a massive brawl that got Magnum stripped of his United States Heavyweight Championship. This set the stage for a best-of-7 series for the title during the Great American Bash Tour. The matches were electric, full of near finishes, interference, and drama. Fans were hooked all summer long. Finally, on August 17, 1986, Nikita defeated Magnum in the climactic match to claim the championship. It was a defining moment in Nikita's career and a storyline fans still talk about today. Not long after becoming U.S. champion, Nikita Koloff unified his title with Wahoo McDaniel's NWA National Heavyweight Championship. Things were looking up for the Russian nightmare, and he was ready for new challenges, like feuding with Ron Garvin and another high-stakes showdown with his rival, Magnum TA. But life had other plans. Magnum TA suffered a devastating car accident that ended his career. This tragedy shook the wrestling world and forced the NWA to rethink their storylines. It also marked a turning point for Nikita Koloff's career. Fast forward to October of that year. The NWA was in Charlotte, North Carolina, hosting a wild cage match. Dusty Rhodes was set to take on Ole Anderson and J.J. Dillon from the Four Horsemen. Dusty needed backup, someone strong enough to even the odds. The crowd couldn't believe what they saw next. Nikita Koloff, the same Soviet powerhouse who had been a sworn enemy of Dusty and Magnum, stormed into the cage. But this time, instead of fighting against Rhodes, he fought with him. The arena exploded with cheers as Nikita turned his back on his old alliances and helped Dusty fend off the Four Horsemen. Fans were stunned. This wasn't just a shocking plot twist. It was the start of something big, a transformation for Koloff that nobody saw coming. When Koloff explained his decision later, his words struck a chord. He admitted that despite their fierce rivalry, he had come to respect Magnum TA deeply. Magnum's accident made Koloff reevaluate his own path. He wanted to earn the respect of the American people too. Just like that, Nikita Koloff was no longer the menacing villain fans loved to hate. He had become a hero, and the fans embraced him with open arms. That night marked a new chapter for Koloff. He joined forces with Dusty Rhodes, one of wrestling's ultimate good guys, and quickly became one of the most beloved stars in the NWA. With Magnum TA out of the picture, the NWA needed someone to challenge Ric Flair for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. Enter Nikita Koloff. His newfound popularity and incredible strength made him the perfect choice. Throughout late 1986 and into 1987, Koloff was on a mission to dethrone Flair. Time and time again, he came painfully close. But Ric Flair wasn't known as the dirtiest player in the game for nothing. The Four Horsemen always had Flair's back, interfering just enough to help him escape with the title intact. As 1987 rolled in, Koloff's momentum didn't slow down. He held on to the United States Championship for nearly 11 months, one of the longest reigns in the title's history. His pride in defending the belt made him an even bigger fan favorite, but his journey wasn't without challenges. While battling Ric Flair in the Four Horsemen, Koloff also found himself up against Paul Jones's army, a faction that included his own uncle, Ivan Koloff. The family feud was intense, and things escalated when Koloff faced Dick Murdoch, one of Jones's top enforcers. In March of that year, Murdoch delivered a devastating brainbuster to Koloff on the concrete floor, leaving him with a storyline neck injury. In April, Koloff teamed up with Dusty Rhodes to win the prestigious Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup Tag Team Tournament. In the finals, they defeated Tully Blanchard and Lex Luger, two of the Four Horsemen's most prominent members, cementing their dominance as a team. As the summer of 1987 rolled around, Koloff found himself at the center of one of the most innovative concepts in wrestling history: War Games. The Great American Bash tour that year featured the debut of War Games, a match designed by Dusty Rhodes himself. It was chaos personified, with Koloff teaming with Rhodes, the Road Warriors, and Paul Ellering to face the Four Horsemen and J.J. Dillon. Koloff's team emerged victorious in both the opening and closing matches of the tour, but the physical toll was immense. During one of the War Games matches, Flair and Blanchard reignited Koloff's storyline neck injury with a pair of devastating spike pile drivers. This set the stage for Koloff's eventual loss of the U.S. title to Lex Luger in a steel cage match on July 11th. Despite the loss, Koloff rebounded quickly, defeating Tully Blanchard in August to capture the NWA World Television Championship. By late 1987, the NWA was undergoing significant changes. Jim Crockett Promotions had acquired Bill Watts' Universal Wrestling Federation, bringing in a wave of new talent. Koloff was immediately thrust into a high-profile feud with UWF television champion Terry Taylor. This rivalry reached its peak at Starrcade 87 in Chicago, where Koloff defeated Taylor to unify the NWA and UWF TV titles. The victory further solidified Koloff's status as one of the promotion's most reliable stars. As the calendar turned to 1988, Koloff's career began to shift. He lost the TV title to Mike Rotunda of the Varsity Club in January, and his focus began to move away from wrestling. Outside the ring, Koloff's life was taking a challenging turn. His wife Mandy was battling Hodgkin's disease, and Koloff took time away from the sport to care for her. Tragically, she passed away in the summer of 1989, leading Koloff to step back from full-time wrestling. Although his appearances became less frequent, Koloff continued to make an impact when he did step into the ring. In 1991, he returned to WCW, reigniting rivalries with Lex Luger and Sting. However, during a match with Big Van Vader in 1992, Koloff sustained a serious neck injury, forcing him to retire from professional wrestling. After his retirement, Koloff's life took a new direction. In 1993, he became a born-again Christian and dedicated himself to ministry work. He also launched his own small wrestling promotion, the Universal Wrestling Alliance, using it as an outreach tool to share his faith. While Koloff largely stayed out of the wrestling spotlight, he occasionally returned for special appearances, including a stint with TNA Wrestling in 2003. Koloff's contributions to wrestling have not gone unrecognized. In 2006, he was honored with the Frank Gotch Award for his positive impact on the sport. And in March 2024, Koloff appeared alongside Magnum TA and other legends to celebrate Sting's retirement match, reminding fans of the incredible legacy he left behind. From his days as the fearsome Russian Nightmare to his transformation into one of wrestling's most beloved heroes, Nikita Koloff's career was a journey of redemption, resilience, and reinvention. His ability to connect with fans, whether as a villain or a hero, is a testament to his skill as a storyteller and performer. Nikita Koloff's story is one of the most fascinating in wrestling history. It's proof that even the most unexpected characters can become heroes, and that the best stories in wrestling aren't just told in the ring, they're lived. What's your favorite moment from Nikita Koloff's career? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible wrestling stories. Until next time, keep it real and keep it wrestling. Everyone loves an underdog story, and Dory Funk Jr. is the ultimate wrestling underdog. He was an absolute beast in the ring, but the tragedy is that he always lived in his brother's shadow. He is a wrestling legend who deserves way more recognition, and we're here for it. Dory Funk Jr., born Dorrance Ernest Funk in 1941, grew up surrounded by wrestling greatness. His father, Dory Funk Sr., was a legendary wrestler and promoter, and his younger brother, Terry Funk, would go on to become one of the most recognizable names in the sport. The tragedy in this is that Dory never truly got the chance to breathe. We'll talk about this in much detail, but before that, here's a little bit about how our legend was made. So gentlemen, wrestling wasn't just a career in the Funk family, it was a way of life. But even with all that legacy behind him, Dory Jr. had to fight to carve out his own place in wrestling history. Before stepping into the ring, Dory was an athlete on the football field, playing for West Texas University. He had talent, no doubt, but his father wasn't the type to let that distract him from the family's true calling. Dory Sr. was tough, even relentless, pushing both Dory and Terry to develop the wrestling skills that would define their careers. Under that intense guidance, Dory found his style, a technical, disciplined style that made him different from the chaos of the wrestling world. Dory's wrestling journey officially began in 1963, and it didn't take long for him to shake the wrestling world. By 1969, he'd reached the pinnacle, winning the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. And not for a year or two, but for 4 long years. Back then, a reign like that wasn't just impressive, it was unheard of. Dory's matches were like chess games, calculated, precise, and always a spectacle of skill. But his story of greatness did not come without controversies. For Dory, one of his biggest struggles was being constantly compared to his younger brother, Terry. While Dory was calm and technical, Terry was wild, unpredictable, and larger than life. Terry's crazy charm and over-the-top moves often made him the center of attention, while Dory was seen as the serious Funk, the wrestler's wrestler. It didn't help that critics and fans a lot of the times framed their dynamic as opposites, Terry the entertainer and Dory the technician. Despite these comparisons, the two brothers shared a bond that went beyond the ring. They teamed up for legendary matches, creating unforgettable moments in wrestling history. And while the spotlight might have leaned more toward Terry, Dory stayed focused on his craft. He rarely complained about the comparisons, instead taking pride in what he'd accomplished. Later in life, Dory reflected on his career with quiet pride. His legacy wasn't about flash or spectacle. It was about skill, storytelling, and inspiring the next generation of wrestlers. He may have spent his life in Terry's shadow, but make no mistake, Dory Funk Jr. was a legend in his own right. While this is what people most talk about, there's also a crazy incident that took place in 1997 in Gainesville, Florida, and it was considered quite controversial. It all started after a match involving MMA fighter and NWA champion Dan Severn. As Severn was leaving the ring, Dory's wife, Marty, playfully threw some water at him. She probably thought it was harmless fun, but Severn didn't see it that way. He wasn't amused at all. When Dory stepped in to calm things down, the situation took an unexpected turn. Before anyone knew it, Dory and Severn were squaring off in the ring. It wasn't planned and it wasn't official, but it sure got everyone's attention. The top ropes were missing from the ring, but that didn't stop them. Dory later said he managed to take Severn down twice during the impromptu match. For Dory, it wasn't just about defending his wife. It was about protecting the honor of wrestling. To him, the ring wasn't just a stage. It was a sacred place where disputes could be settled the right way. That wasn't the only time Dory made headlines. His rivalry with Jack Briscoe is one of the most famous in wrestling history. Their matches weren't just about athletic competition. They told incredible stories. Fans would sit on the edge of their seats as the two wrestlers battled it out. Many of their matches ended in dramatic draws, which only added to the excitement. Those encounters helped cement both Dory and Briscoe as legends of the sport. Even in his later years, Dory found himself at the center of controversy. At the age of 83, he took part in a double hell current explosion death match in Japan. The match was no ordinary wrestling bout. It included explosions, dangerous stunts, and plenty of risk. Critics said it was too much for someone his age and that it might hurt his legacy. But Dory didn't see it that way. For him, it was proof that his love for wrestling hadn't faded, no matter how old he was. Throughout his life, Dory Funk Jr. faced challenges, criticism, and physical battles. But no matter what, he stayed committed to wrestling. For over 20 years, he and his wife, Marty, ran the Funking Conservatory, a wrestling school in Ocala, Florida. Together, they trained and mentored countless young wrestlers, passing on everything they knew about the sport. The Funking Conservatory produced some of the biggest names in wrestling, including Kurt Angle, Matt and Jeff Hardy, and Lita. Dory focused on teaching the fundamentals of wrestling, along with storytelling and discipline. He wanted his students to understand the importance of respecting the ring and carrying on the traditions that defined his career. Dory Funk Jr.'s story is about more than just wrestling matches. It's about passion, resilience, and a lifelong love for the sport. Whether he was in the ring, facing criticism, or training the next generation of wrestlers, Dory always gave it his all. His legacy as a wrestler, mentor, and pioneer will always be remembered. If you are a true fan and have stayed till here, make sure you subscribe to this channel and also give this video a big thumbs up. Also, if you are a big fan of wrestling highlights, make sure you keep watching because in the next segment, we have a rundown of the epic career of Dory Funk Jr. Dory Funk Jr. debuted in professional wrestling in 1963, working alongside his father early on. Those early years taught him discipline and helped him develop a style that focused on technique, precision, and storytelling. While Dory wasn't flashy or over the top, his calm and focused approach stood out. His career took a big turn in 1969 when he defeated Gene Kiniski to become the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. At just 28 years old, he was the youngest wrestler to win the prestigious title at the time. What made his victory even more special was the reign that followed. Dory held the NWA World Heavyweight Championship for over 4 years, a record-breaking achievement. Dory's matches during his title reign were known for their intensity and skill. He faced off against some of the biggest names in wrestling, including Harley Race, Terry Funk, his younger brother, and Jack Briscoe. His rivalry with Briscoe became the stuff of legend. Their matches were more than just fights. They were masterpieces of athleticism and storytelling that had fans hooked from beginning to end. While Dory's in-ring career is legendary, his impact goes far beyond his own matches. In 1991, Dory and his wife, Marty, founded the Funking Conservatory, a wrestling school in Ocala, Florida. For over 2 decades, they trained and mentored countless aspiring wrestlers, passing on Dory's wealth of knowledge and experience. The list of alumni from the Funking Conservatory reads like a who's who of wrestling stars, including WWE Hall of Famer Kurt Angle, Matt and Jeff Hardy, and Lita. Dory emphasized fundamentals, storytelling, and respect for the sport. He believed wrestling was about connecting with the audience and honoring the traditions that made it great. Through the Funking Conservatory, Dory left an indelible mark on the next generation of wrestlers. His students didn't just learn moves, they learned what it meant to truly love and respect the art of wrestling. Dory Funk Jr.'s career is a story of resilience, passion, and influence. From his record-breaking title reign to his wild later years, he has remained a constant presence in the wrestling world. His calm, technical style and dedication to storytelling have inspired countless wrestlers, and his work as a mentor ensures that his legacy will continue for generations to come. Whether you remember him for his epic matches, his time as a tag team with his brother, or his role as a teacher, one thing is clear: Dory Funk Jr. is a true legend of professional wrestling. Thanks for watching. Dory Funk Jr.'s incredible journey through wrestling is proof that passion, hard work, and love for the sport can create a lasting legacy. From his early days growing up in a wrestling family to his record-breaking reign as NWA World Heavyweight Champion, Dory's career is packed with unforgettable moments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the lives of wrestling legends. And let us know in the comments below, what's your favorite Dory Funk Jr. moment? Was it his rivalry with Jack Briscoe, his unexpected showdown with Dan Severn, or maybe his later years as a mentor at the Funking Conservatory? We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going with fellow wrestling fans. Stay tuned for more amazing stories about the icons of wrestling, the rivalries that made history, and the moments that changed the sport forever. Until next time, keep celebrating the art of wrestling, and we'll see you in the next video.
Many wrestlers have passed away too young, but Rick Rude's story is especially haunting. It involves a cocktail of drugs, a history of pain, and unanswered questions that still linger today. Want to know exactly what went wrong? Let's get into it. Rick Rude, or Richard Irwin Rude, as he was born, was quite the character in the world of professional wrestling. He was born on December 7, 1958, in St. Peter, Minnesota, and it's safe to say he left a big mark on the wrestling scene. Everyone knew him as Ravishing Rick Rude, and he really lived up to that ring name with his flashy style and bold personality. Rick's wrestling career kicked off in 1982, and he quickly became a fan favorite. He wrestled for some of the biggest promotions out there, like the World Championship Wrestling, World Wrestling Federation, and even Extreme Championship Wrestling. His career was going strong until an injury forced him into retirement in 1994, though he did jump back in the ring for one last match in 1997. Over the years, Rick bagged a bunch of championships. He was a four-time world champion, picking up titles in different promotions, including a stint as the WWF Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion. The guy was seriously tough in the ring. One of the coolest things Rick did was in 1997, when he helped start the D-Generation X stable with Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna. That same year, he pulled off a wild stunt by appearing on both WWF's Raw and WCW's Monday Nitro on the same night. This was a huge deal because Raw was recorded earlier, and he had switched over to WCW by the time it aired. Everything was going fine till now, until one day he was found dead out of nowhere. Now, before we get into the details of his untimely death, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Thanks. Rick Rude's sudden death in 1999 really shook up his fans and the wrestling community. He passed away from heart failure, which the doctors linked to an overdose of various medications. There's still a lot of mystery around the exact circumstances of his death, and over the years, plenty of rumors and speculation have popped up. When the doctors looked into it, they found that Rick had a mix of muscle relaxants, painkillers, and sleep aids in his system. They also noted that he had an enlarged heart, which can be made worse by certain kinds of medications, and that probably played a big role in his heart failing. A lot of Rick's friends and fellow wrestlers have talked openly about what they think might have happened. Some believe he might have taken too many pills on purpose, while others think it was just a tragic accident, with him not realizing how dangerous the combination of drugs could be. There's also a pretty common theory that Rick was struggling with some serious issues behind the scenes. People think he might have been dealing with depression, and a lot of pain from old wrestling injuries. Wrestling can really wear you down physically, and it's not uncommon for wrestlers to end up with chronic pain. If Rick was in that much pain, he might have started relying more on his medications just to get through the day, which could have led to taking too much without intending to. This idea that he was trying to manage his pain and maybe his mental health too with these medications, and it all just became too much, hasn't been officially confirmed, but it makes sense to a lot of people. It's a sad reminder of how tough things can get, especially when you're dealing with pain and not getting enough help. Sure, it was one of the biggest losses in the history of wrestling, but we can't move on without giving a tribute to his legacy. Rick's wrestling journey began under the guidance of Eddie Sharkey, a well-known trainer who had helped many wrestlers find their footing. With a fresh start in 1982, Rick debuted as Ricky Rude, the good guy everyone rooted for, but he didn't win his first televised match. Despite the rocky start, he didn't give up. He wrestled in Vancouver in Georgia before making a splash in World Championship Wrestling in 1983, winning his first match there with a simple yet effective dropkick. In 1984, Rick reinvented himself. He came back to the Memphis wrestling scene as Ravishing Rick Rude, an arrogant character you love to hate, managed by none other than Jimmy Hart. This new persona got him into feuds with big names like Jerry Lawler, and it was clear Rick was someone to watch. Rick's wrestling career kept gaining momentum as he moved around various promotions, picking up championships and stirring up trouble. In late 1984, he joined Championship Wrestling from Florida. Here, managed by Percy Pringle, Rick continued his winning streak and engaged in more high-stakes feuds. 1985 was another turning point. Rick shifted to World-Class Championship Wrestling, and oh boy did he stir up drama. He captured titles and became the first world champion of the newly named World-Class Wrestling Association. Fast forward to 1987. When Rick hit the big time by joining the World Wrestling Federation, he quickly became infamous for his antics both before and during matches, often riling up the crowd with his over-the-top arrogance. His rivalry with Jake the Snake Roberts was particularly memorable, involving mind games that included Rick taunting Roberts with a picture of Roberts' wife on his tights. Rick's knack for playing the villain was unmatched. He was the guy you loved to boo, with his showy taunts and flamboyant style. His time in the WWF saw him picking fights and stirring the pot, making a name for himself as a superb entertainer and a master at playing the crowd. After some intense years filled with feuds, championships, and memorable moments, Rick left the WWF in 1990 over a real-life disagreement. He popped up in various wrestling promotions afterwards, but injuries and other challenges eventually led him to retire from active wrestling. Even in retirement, Rick couldn't stay away from wrestling for long. He made a surprising comeback in the late 90s, joining Extreme Championship Wrestling, and later the notorious D-Generation X in the WWF during a particularly controversial time. Off the ring, Rick's life was full too. He married twice and was a dedicated dad. His life was tragically cut short in 1999, but he left behind a legacy that still resonates in the wrestling world today. Rick Rude wasn't just a character in the ring. He was a true showman, a fierce competitor, and a devoted family man to those who knew him best. Through all the ups and downs, Rick Rude embraced his role in wrestling with unmatched passion, always ready to play the villain in the ring, but keeping his heart devoted to his family outside of it. What a journey, right? Rick Rude's story really tugs at the heartstrings, doesn't it? It's a mix of high-octane wrestling action and some real human moments that remind us of the pressures these stars face. Known for his larger-than-life persona, Ravishing Rick Rude was not just a wrestling icon, but also a man grappling with the physical and mental tolls of his sport. His sudden death, linked to a cocktail of medications, is a serious wake-up call about the unseen battles many athletes face. Reflecting on Rick's journey, from his flashy beginnings to his untimely passing, reminds us to appreciate the person behind the persona. While we celebrate his unforgettable moments in the ring, we're also reminded of the importance of proper support for mental and physical health, especially after athletes step out of the spotlight. If Rick's story struck a chord with you, why not give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel? We love diving deep into the lives of wrestling's biggest names, and we'd love for you to join our community. Hit that bell icon to stay updated with all our latest videos. And hey, drop a comment below. What did Rick Rude mean to you? Let's keep this conversation going and remember the man behind the ravishing nickname.
Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Why are you making a video on Paul Roma out of nowhere? But trust me, this dude was something special. Just look at him. The guy was chiseled out of granite. He had that classic arrogant heel persona down pat, and he could go in the ring with the best of them. But for whatever reason, his career was a bit of a roller coaster, and today we'll discuss all that. Let's rewind a bit. Roma first made a name for himself in the WWF as one half of the Young Stallions with Jim Powers. These guys were like the prototypical high-flying babyface tag team. They had the flashy moves, the good looks, and the fans loved them. But despite their popularity, they never really got a proper run with the tag team titles. It's a real head-scratcher because they had all the ingredients for success. Nonetheless, things started looking up for Roma. He teamed up with Hercules Hernandez to form Power and Glory, managed by the legendary Doctor of Style Slick. This team was a force to be reckoned with. They were big, they were powerful, and they had that classic heel arrogance that made you love to hate them. They had some killer feuds with teams like the Rockers and the Legion of Doom, and they even challenged for the tag team titles on a few occasions. But again, it felt like they never quite got over the hump. Then came what seemed like his big break, your WCW and the Four Horsemen. Roma joined the most iconic faction in wrestling history, standing shoulder to shoulder with legends like Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Tully Blanchard. This was it, right? This was his ticket to the main event. But things didn't exactly go according to plan. To pinpoint, there was an infamous incident with Alex Wright, a young and upcoming star in WCW that made Roma on the controversial wrestlers list. Apparently, Roma took exception to something during their match, and things got a little physical. Let's just say it wasn't a good look for Roma, and it definitely damaged his reputation. And that wasn't the only issue. There were stories about Roma being difficult to work with, being stiff in the ring, and generally having a bit of a chip on his shoulder. And then there were those comments he made about the Chris Benoit tragedy. In a shoot interview, Roma made controversial remarks about Chris Benoit after the double murder and suicide tragedy. He questioned the accepted narrative surrounding the events and suggested alternative theories. These comments were met with significant backlash from fans in the wrestling community who found them insensitive and disrespectful given the tragic circumstances. Look, I'm not going to dwell on this, but it definitely didn't help his image. It's a real shame because when you watch Paul Roma wrestle, you can't deny his talent. He had the size, the strength, the athleticism, and the charisma. He could have been a main eventer, a world champion, a legend. But for whatever reason, bad luck, bad timing, bad attitude, maybe a combination of all three, it just never quite happened for him. And that's what makes Paul Roma such a fascinating case. He's a reminder that in pro wrestling, talent alone isn't always enough. Sometimes it's the things outside the ring that can make or break a career. And in Roma's case, those things seem to have held him back from reaching his full potential. So, what do you guys think? Was Paul Roma a victim of circumstance? Did he sabotage his own career? Or was he just never truly appreciated for the talent he was? Whatever your answer might be, you can't deny he was great in the ring. To celebrate his long-forgotten legacy, here is a quick rundown of his career. Paul Roma's story starts in a small, tight-knit neighborhood in Kensington, New York, where dreams often felt far away, but determination could take you places. Born Paul Centopani on April 29, 1960, Roma grew up in a working-class family. His father was a carpenter, and his mother worked tirelessly to keep the family together. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was grounded in strong values. Work hard, stay humble, and never give up. As a kid, Paul was like many others in the neighborhood. He'd spend his days running around with friends, climbing trees, and playing stickball in the streets. But even in those early years, there was something different about Paul. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. He had a spark. While others were content to spend their afternoons lounging around, Paul was always on the move. Whether it was racing his friends or improvising wrestling matches in the backyard, he loved competition and always seemed to have a drive that set him apart. It wasn't long before Paul discovered his love for fitness. In his teenage years, he stumbled upon his older brother's dusty set of weights tucked away in the garage. At first, it was just a curiosity, something to mess around with. But the more he lifted, the more he realized he had a knack for it. It became his outlet, a way to channel his energy and build something for himself. With no YouTube tutorials or fancy equipment, Paul created his own workouts, using milk crates as benches and cinder blocks for weights. He wasn't just building muscle, he was building confidence. By the time Paul was in high school, he developed a reputation as the strongest guy in the neighborhood. Friends would challenge him to arm wrestling matches or try to keep up with him in push-up contests, but no one could quite match his raw strength and determination. But Paul wasn't just about lifting weights. He had a natural charisma that made people gravitate toward him. Teachers saw him as a leader, friends saw him as someone they could count on, and his family knew he had big dreams, even if he didn't quite know how to chase them yet. Wrestling was always in the background during his early years. Saturday mornings were sacred in the Centopani household. Paul and his brothers would gather around the TV to watch wrestling legends like Bruno Sammartino and Bob Backlund. Paul loved the spectacle, the larger-than-life personas, and the electricity of the matches. To him, these men weren't just athletes, they were superheroes. It wasn't until his early 20s, however, that wrestling became more than just a dream. A friend suggested he try his hand at professional wrestling, noticing Paul's athleticism and undeniable stage presence. At first, Paul laughed it off. After all, how does a kid from Kensington make it to the world of professional wrestling? But the idea stuck with him. One day, he decided to take a leap of faith. He walked into a local wrestling school, unsure of what to expect, but determined to give it his all. It wasn't glamorous, just a dingy gym with a makeshift ring in the middle. But for Paul, it felt like the start of something big. Training wasn't easy. Wrestling wasn't just about strength, it was about timing, technique, and showmanship. Paul spent hours learning how to lock up with an opponent, throw a convincing punch, and take a fall without getting hurt. He also learned how to sell the hits, making everything look as real as possible to the audience. It was tough work, but Paul thrived under the pressure. Even in those early days, Paul's trainers could see he had something special. He wasn't the tallest guy in the room or the most intimidating, but he had a rare mix of athleticism, discipline, and charm. He had this ability to connect with people, something that would serve him well in his wrestling career. After months of training, Paul started getting booked for small, local wrestling shows. These weren't the glamorous, big-time matches you'd see on TV. They were in high school gyms or community centers with just a handful of people in the crowd. But Paul treated every match like it was WrestleMania. He gave 100% every time, determined to make a name for himself. His big break came in the early 1980s when he caught the attention of scouts from the World Wrestling Federation, WWF. Joining the WWF was like hitting the jackpot. Suddenly, Paul was stepping into the same locker room as some of the biggest stars in the industry. At first, his role was small. He wrestled in lower card matches, often facing bigger, more experienced opponents. These were the kind of matches where the newer guys were expected to make the established stars look good. But Paul made the most of every opportunity. Fans started noticing his athleticism and the way he carried himself in the ring. Before long, Paul teamed up with fellow wrestler Jim Powers to form a tag team called the Young Stallions. The two had great chemistry, and their youthful energy made them a hit with the fans. They weren't the biggest or the strongest team, but their flashy moves and underdog spirit won over the crowd. Their biggest moment came at the 1987 Survivor Series, where they were part of a winning team in a high-profile tag team match. For Paul, it was proof that all his hard work was paying off. Still, he wasn't satisfied. Paul knew he had more to offer, and by the late 1980s, he decided to move on from the WWF to explore new opportunities. This bold decision would open doors to even bigger challenges and greater success, setting the stage for the next chapter in his career. As the wrestling world shifted in the 1990s, so did Paul Roma's career. He continued to work with WCW, where he teamed up with Paul Orndorff as part of Pretty Wonderful, a tag team known for their flamboyant arrogance and in-ring prowess. Together, they captured the WCW World Tag Team Championship multiple times, cementing their status as one of the standout duos of the era. While Roma's skills remained sharp, his career began to slow as WCW underwent changes in leadership and direction. By the mid-1990s, Roma was wrestling less frequently and began to focus on other interests outside the ring. His final years in WCW weren't as illustrious as his earlier days, but Roma remained a respected figure in the locker room. In the latter part of the decade, Roma transitioned into the independent wrestling scene. He worked with smaller promotions, including New England Wrestling, where he shared his expertise with younger talent. This phase of his career was marked by a sense of giving back, as Roma became increasingly involved in training and mentoring aspiring wrestlers. Paul Roma officially retired from full-time wrestling in the late 1990s, though he occasionally appeared in independent promotions into the 2000s. Retirement didn't mean stepping away from the sport entirely. Instead, Roma shifted his focus to coaching and training, using his decades of experience to help mold the next generation of wrestlers. In 1999, he co-founded the wrestling school at Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling in Connecticut. Through PAPW, Roma mentored countless young wrestlers, emphasizing discipline, technique, and respect for the industry. His contributions as a coach and trainer became a significant part of his legacy, earning him admiration from those he helped guide. Away from the wrestling ring, Roma enjoyed a quieter life, spending time with family and staying active in his community. His days of grueling travel schedules and intense matches were replaced with a steadier pace, though his passion for wrestling never waned. As of today, Paul Roma is still actively involved in the wrestling world, primarily through his work at PAPW. The school has become a hub for aspiring wrestlers looking to break into the industry. Roma's hands-on approach as a trainer is often highlighted by his students, who praise his dedication and deep knowledge of the sport. Outside of wrestling, Roma lives a relatively low-profile life. He occasionally participates in wrestling conventions and interviews, reflecting on his career and sharing insights from his time in the ring. Fans appreciate his candid stories and his straightforward, no-nonsense personality. Now in his 60s, Roma remains in great physical shape, a testament to his lifelong commitment to fitness. He's seen as a wrestling veteran who stayed true to his roots, giving back to the industry that shaped him. His legacy is one of hard work, adaptability, and a genuine love for professional wrestling, ensuring his name continues to resonate with fans old and new. And that's a wrap. Thanks for sticking with me as we dove into the fascinating career of Paul Roma, an underrated talent with a roller coaster of a journey. I mean, whether you loved him, hated him, or were somewhere in between, you can't deny the guy had us something. From his days as a young stallion to rubbing shoulders with legends in the Four Horsemen, Roma's career was anything but ordinary. But hey, now it's your turn. What do you think? Was Paul Roma a hidden gem who didn't get his due? Or were there just too many bumps along the way? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your fellow wrestling fans, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the stories behind the stars. Oh, and tap the bell icon so you never miss out. Because trust me, we've got a lot more wrestling history to uncover together. Thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, stay awesome, and as always, keep the spirit of wrestling alive. See you soon.